GramacTalks.
Big minds, big walks. Be the light that guides, the courage that explodes.
GramacTalks.
Yeah, open up new doors.
Hey everyone, and welcome back to Grammar Talks. Today I want to ask you a question. What if your greatest talent isn't something that you're necessarily born with, but something you build over time? See, we live in a world that celebrates overnight success. Social media makes it seem like people woke up one moment and suddenly they become authors, entrepreneurs, musicians, or, five-star athletes. But in truth, real mastery doesn't happen overnight. It happens with one small step at a time. So recently I finished reading a book. It's called Mastery by Robert Greene. And one idea from that book really stood out to me. And it's something that the author emphasizes a lot. And this is that nearly every great master in history once began as an apprentice. Before they became extraordinary or famous, they were beginners. They were once amateurs in the field. They were once rookies. And for me, that's encouraging, because it means that you don't necessarily have to know everything today. You just have to keep learning all you can and trust the process. So actually, I have one of my favorite stories from the book. It actually comes from ancient Egypt. And if you know me, I'm a big Indiana Jones / archaeology fan, so this story really interests me a lot. And it's based on real archaeological evidence too. See, for centuries, no one could read ancient Egyptian hieroglyphics, because the language had been silent for nearly 1,500 years. And then, sometime in the early 1800s, I believe, there came a young French scholar named Jean-François Champollion. I may have butchered that. I apologize. But as a child, he became fascinated with the subject of ancient Egypt. And instead of chasing what everyone else was studying, he immersed himself in languages. He began learning Greek, Latin, Hebrew, Arabic, and Coptic. And when the Rosetta Stone was discovered in 1799, scholars across Europe tried to unlock its mystery. And the same message had been written in 3 scripts: Greek, Demotic, and hieroglyphics. And while others saw a mystery, Champollion saw an opportunity. See, because he had spent years preparing and studying and observing all that he could on the Rosetta Stone and ancient history. Years later, that preparation, that Champollion had allowed him to succeed where others had failed. And by carefully comparing the three languages, he finally unlocked the code. After centuries of silence, ancient Egypt could speak again. Imagine that. One person's dedication opened the door to an entire civilization. And mastery often looks like that. Years of quiet preparation, years of studying, of honing your skill. And it was followed by one moment that changed history. You might not be a scholar, you might be an athlete. Great athletes once were, picked up on the street. And it wasn't because they became star athletes overnight. Many of them worked many had, regular jobs. They were poor and they played on the streets. And happens a lot in Latin South America that recruiters come. They look at the athlete's skill and they recruit them to, football clubs or soccer clubs. But in those clubs, they train the athletes to get better at, at their function. And they're not born stars overnight. There's a quote that says, legends aren't created, they're made. And the same thing happens in our lives, in our professions. We don't wake up one day and become professionals. It's the years of hard work, dedication, and experience. And another story that amazes me, and I actually told my parents one night at dinner, is the story of the linguist Daniel Everett. See, he and his wife Karen from Brazil traveled deep into the Amazon to live among the Pirahã people. And there were no language apps back then. There were no dictionaries, no grammar books. So it was very tough for missionaries, to spread the gospel to the Pirahã people, or even to communicate to them. But Everett learned by listening to them, by observing the ways of life, by asking questions to the locals, and most importantly, by living among the Pirahã people. And year after year, he immersed himself in their culture until he became one of the world's foremost experts on their language. And he even translated the Bible into Pirahã, if I believe. But the point is, whether you're learning a language, writing a book, or honing a skill, mastery requires immersion. You have to dedicate your time fully to that which you find passion for. You can't simply admire excellence and success, but you have to practice it every day, little by little. And, like, we see the same pattern everywhere. Michael Jordan was unbelievably cut from his high school varsity team. Thomas Edison tested thousands of materials before creating a practical light bulb. J.R.R. Tolkien spent decades building Middle-earth before The Lord of the Rings had become a classic. George R.R. Martin, before he wrote A Song of Ice, before A Song of Ice and Fire became a worldwide phenomenon and inspired the hit HBO series Game of Thrones, he actually spent decades honing his craft. At first he began writing short stories. He also worked as a television writer, and he faced, tons of rejected manuscripts. However, through those experiences, he kept refining his storytelling. And he didn't become an overnight success, but he became a master of his craft by committing himself to writing for years. And yet you're still waiting for winter. So George, please, right, please, finish the book. But the point is, by the time that readers discovered the Lord of Westeros, Martin had already spent a lifetime learning how to build rich characters, believable worlds, and unforgettable stories. And these, few examples to show that none of these great writers or athletes or, inventors or, actors, they never became masters overnight. But they became masters because they refused to quit. They kept, like I said, honing their skill. They kept pushing through late night hours. Not late night hours watching, TV, but late night hours, practicing, writing, experimenting. And psychologists have actually studied this for years. One of the strongest predictors of long-term success isn't intelligence, believe it or not. It's something called deliberate practice. Deliberate practice means intentionally working on your weaknesses instead of only doing what you're already good at. And yes, it can be uncomfortable sometimes. It can also be frustrating. But that's where real growth happens. See, mastery isn't about perfection, but it's about continuous improvement. 1% better today than yesterday. Look, I get it. We all have bad days. I have my bad days too. But don't let the faults of yesterday ruin here today. Because, we can't change the past. We can't see the future. But all we have is today. And little steps we do today, little intentional steps we take. We might not see immediate results. And in the world that, we in a society that we expect immediate results, instant gratification, that's hard for people. I've seen it. But if we have intention to work on our craft, to work on our what we like, and we continue to get better at what we do, not just practice the same thing over and over again. In the long term, that we'll get better at it, and we'll be able to hone it and make an impact. As someone who's CP, I have to learn that lesson personally, and I have to sometimes remind myself every day that, there are things that I may not be able to do the same way as others. But I've also discovered that consistency matters more than speed. Every podcast episode or every chapter I write and every class I complete and really every conversation I have with people, those are small investments in the person I'm becoming. They are small wins. Because purpose isn't discovered sitting still, but it's discovered while moving forward. Or as I would like to call it, rolling forward. So how do you discover your purpose? Well, I think it begins with paying attention. What excites your curiosity? What problems do you enjoy solving? What can you spend hours learning without getting bored? I personally believe that God has given every one of us unique gifts. And those gifts, we don't have to and do it for ourselves, but we could use the gifts to help others as well. And there's, and if God gave you a gift, use that gift. Don't hide it. And it's not about comparing your journey to someone else's. That's how mastery ends. That's how lives can be ruined, by comparing yourself. Don't ever compare yourself to others, because every journey is unique, and every challenge is faithfully developing the gifts that you've already been given. See, Robert Greene writes that mastery is a lifelong journey. as well as discipleship, I would like to add. Because no matter how much you learn, whether it be a vocation, a sport, or even the Bible, there's always another mountain to climb. There's always another lesson to discover. And there's another person to encourage. I just recently watched Spider-Man with my brother. And I'm not gonna spoil the movie for you guys. But there's a scene where Peter is visiting Aunt May's grave. And there's a quote that really stood out to me. I believe it was, "It takes one person to help another." You don't have to help the whole world. You just have to help one person at a time. You just have to take it one day at a time. So don't be discouraged if you're still in the apprenticeship stage. If you think about it, our whole lives are apprenticeship stages, and we learn something new every day. See, every master was once there. Or in Star Wars terms, every great Jedi Master was once a Padawan. So this week, I'd like to leave you with a challenge. Choose one skill that you want to become better at. Maybe it's you're not a good reader. Or just try reading one chapter a day. Or maybe just a couple pages. Or whatever it may be. But practice that skill for 30 minutes. Maybe it's learning a new language. I'm actually learning Portuguese. And, I try, learning that for 30 minutes every day, or at least as long as Duolingo lets me. I know this podcast isn't sponsored by them. But maybe you could ask one question about anything. But I encourage you to find a mentor, or even multiple mentors. And in the book, it states, yes, find a mentor, someone who maybe is an expert in what you want to do or in your field, and try to learn as much as you can from that person. Now that doesn't mean you have to copy a mentor, just learn all you can from him or her. And with that knowledge, put your own trust into it. Make that skill your own. And, because purpose isn't found by waiting, but it's found by discovering, by exploring, by being in the field. I remember Indiana Jones quote, I think it was from Kingdom of the Crystal Skull, where he said that true archaeology isn't done in the library. It's out in the field. Well, and I'm obviously paraphrasing, but basically, go out there and practice that skill. In order to get to learn information about it, but now you need to do it. And it's okay if you fail at first, because that's part of the process. And we learn from each failure. And if we learn from those failures, we eventually get better at our skills. Thanks for joining me today. And remember, be the light that guides, the courage that explores, and the faith that endures.